Good morning. I'm Remo. Thai and Cambodian troops just opened fire at their disputed border, with a military drone detected before the deadly clash that's now triggered a full diplomatic crisis. This is the Daily Signal for July 24th, 2025. Stay tuned for the rest of the stories. Here are the other top stories for July 24th, 2025. Xi Jinping's EU summit just got downsized as trade wars and Ukraine tensions kill diplomatic hopes. Russia-Ukraine peace talks remain completely stalled, with both sides trading ceasefire violation accusations. Gaza doctors are now too weak from hunger to treat patients as the medical system collapses. The UN's top court just ruled nations can be held legally responsible for climate change damages. Thousands of Ukrainians are protesting Zelensky's crackdown on corruption watchdogs. They say protects elites. Your American passport just dropped to 10th place globally as visa-free access shrinks worldwide. The U.S. Army fired its new China-focused missile system in the Western Pacific and found its target. Israeli forces have killed over 1,000 aid seekers in Gaza since May, according to a new UN report. A Russian soldier reveals commanders saw troops as expendable in Ukraine, with poor supplies and no care. Now let's dive into each story. Breaking overnight, Cambodian troops opened fire near Prasat Tam Muin Tam Temple in Thailand's Surin province. Here's the shocking detail. A Cambodian military drone was detected shortly before the shooting began, suggesting this wasn't spontaneous. 2 Thai soldiers were wounded in the exchange. Thailand immediately recalled its ambassador from Cambodia and expelled Cambodia's envoy from Bangkok. Both militaries remain on high alert along the contested border. This escalation started in late May when previous fighting killed a Cambodian soldier. Why this matters? These are 2 ASEAN neighbors whose border conflict now threatens regional stability across Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, in Europe, Chinese President Xi Jinping's planned summit with EU leaders has been dramatically scaled down. The reason? Persistent disagreements over trade policies and completely opposite stances on the Russia-Ukraine war. EU officials tell us expectations for any breakthrough have been scrapped. The downsizing signals how China-EU relations have deteriorated as both sides balance cooperation against strategic competition. Here's what they're not telling you. This meeting was supposed to reset diplomatic relations, but Ukraine has become the deal breaker that neither side will compromise on. Speaking of Ukraine, peace talks remain completely stalled, with no breakthrough reported in recent weeks. Fighting continues along eastern Ukrainian front lines, with both sides accusing each other of ceasefire violations. International mediators are calling for renewed dialogue, but admit deep mistrust is blocking any progress. The deadlock means prolonged humanitarian suffering and continued geopolitical tensions across Europe. The real story: neither side appears willing to make the concessions necessary for meaningful negotiations to resume. In Gaza, doctors are suffering severe malnutrition and becoming too weak to treat wounded civilians. This critical detail will surprise you. Ongoing blockades have restricted food and medical supplies so severely that the healthcare workers themselves are now patients. Aid agencies warn of a completely collapsing health system with rising mortality if these conditions persist. Medical facilities that were barely functioning are now shutting down entirely. This crisis underscores the urgent need for humanitarian corridors amid escalating hostilities. Without immediate intervention, Gaza's medical infrastructure will be gone within weeks. The UN's International Court of Justice just issued a landmark ruling that changes everything. Major carbon-emitting nations can now be held legally accountable for climate damages. The court urged immediate emission cuts and ordered reparations to vulnerable states disproportionately impacted by climate change. This sets a precedent for international legal frameworks that could force climate action through courts rather than politics. Why this matters? This ruling pressures governments to adopt stronger climate policies ahead of upcoming global summits and gives smaller nations legal weapons against bigger polluters. Back to Ukraine. Thousands of Ukrainians rallied against President Zelensky's recent moves to restrict the independence of the National Anti-Corruption Agency. Protesters fear this undermines transparency and stalls the reform essential for EU integration. The government claims reforms are necessary to streamline investigations, but critics accuse Zelensky of shielding elites from prosecution. Here's the key detail. This internal conflict impacts Ukraine's democratic trajectory while the country is fighting a war. You'll want to remember this. Corruption scandals could derail Ukraine's EU membership hopes, even if they win the war. Your American passport just lost power. The latest Henley Passport Index places the U.S. passport at 10th place globally, down from higher previous rankings. This reflects reduced visa-free access to key countries amid shifting geopolitical policies. Despite still providing strong global mobility, the decline signals changing perceptions of U.S. diplomatic influence worldwide. Countries that once welcomed Americans without visas are now requiring them. This means more paperwork, higher travel costs, and longer wait times for American travelers planning international trips. The U.S. Army has conducted live-fire tests of a newly deployed long-range missile system at a training site in the Western Pacific. The target? A simulated ship that the missile found and sank successfully. This maneuver demonstrates enhanced strike capabilities aimed at deterring Chinese military assertiveness in the region. The missile system can hit targets over 1,000 miles away, reaching deep into areas China considers its sphere of influence. This deployment forms part of a broader U.S. strategy to maintain strategic balance amid rising tensions over Taiwan and the South China Sea. China has already condemned the test as provocative. A new UN report confirms over 1,000 civilians seeking aid in Gaza have been killed since May during Israeli military operations. These are people standing in food lines, waiting at aid distribution points, or seeking medical care. The report calls for urgent protection of humanitarian corridors and accountability for violations of international law. This number, 1,000 civilians seeking help who died instead, intensifies global calls for ceasefire and increased aid access. The UN says this represents a systematic failure to protect civilians who were actively seeking humanitarian assistance. Finally, a Russian soldier interviewed after returning from Ukraine described feeling treated as expendable by commanders. He cited poor supplies, inadequate medical care, and officers who showed no concern for troop welfare. This personal testimony highlights serious morale issues and human costs on the Russian side that Moscow doesn't want discussed publicly. The soldier said many troops felt abandoned by their leadership and questioned the mission. Such accounts raise concerns over troop welfare and the sustainability of Russia's military campaign as the war drags on with heavy casualties. Let me connect these stories because they reveal three critical global patterns emerging right now. First, military tensions are escalating everywhere. From Thailand-Cambodia border clashes to U.S. missile tests targeting China, from Gaza violence to Russia-Ukraine stalemate, armed conflicts are intensifying rather than resolving. Second, international institutions are being tested. The UN Court's climate ruling, the downsized China-EU summit, and stalled Ukraine peace talks show traditional diplomacy struggling to address modern crises. Third, accountability is becoming the central issue of 2025. Whether it's climate responsibility, corruption in Ukraine, Gaza civilian deaths, or Russian troop welfare, people worldwide are demanding answers from their leaders. Here's what this means for you. These interconnected crises suggest we're entering a period where military solutions are replacing diplomatic ones. International law is being weaponized by all sides, and domestic pressures are forcing leaders into harder positions. The pattern is clear. Compromise is becoming politically impossible, making peaceful resolutions increasingly unlikely. That affects everything from travel and trade to energy prices and global stability. Stay informed, stay safe, and we'll see you tomorrow on the Daily Signal. I'm Remo. Thanks for listening.